Hey everyone, what's going on? It's If You Have to Pick Three. It's Matt.
And it's Zach.
We each get to pick three of something, depending on what list we're doing, and then we fight it out for a final top three list. You click the picture, or you click the episode, and, well, we're talking pop punk this time. What are the top three pop punk albums?
Yeah. It's Warped Tour and Hot Topic all rolled into one single little fun episode.
With a lip ring.
And a snotty suburban attitude. You know, what a terrible characterization. I'm sorry if I just pissed off everyone who was like, ooh, I'm excited to hear. Oh, they're just shitting. No, we're not just shitting on the genre. I swear to you. In fact, I can proudly proclaim that Matt and I are fans of this genre.
Oh yeah.
One of my favorite festival experiences was going to the Warped Tour 25th anniversary event in Atlantic City. We've even gotten to interview some pop punk royalty, Cyrus from Newfound Glory, Cone from Sum 41. If you haven't listened to those, I highly recommend that you listen to our chat. Some really cool, fun stories about their on the road and everything. And it's one of those genres that comes in waves. At some points, it's just most coolest, hippest thing in music. And then suddenly it becomes kind of uncool, and then back up cool. And it's you look at the history of pop punk.
Hang on a second. I never thought it fell out of favor, but that's just me and maybe my old man ways.
Apparently, but like, let me rephrase that. Like, so right now it's going through a huge mainstream revival with artists like Machine Gun Kelly, and even Willow Smith is doing pop punk songs. A lot of younger artists are picking up on it again. Whereas I feel like the past few years, it was loved, but it wasn't getting huge mainstream attention like it did during the mid 90s and early 2000s with Blink and with Blink 182 and Green Day. Not to go too much further on our list. And the reason why I bring that up also is that at first you think, oh, well, it's clearly this time period of a genre. But then you really look at its roots, and you can go all the way back to the early 80s, even early 70s. You want to talk about bands like obviously the Ramones or the Buzzcocks and the Descendants. And I think, not to go too crazy or down a wormhole here, but I think, Matt, what I love about the genre so much is that there's a sense of nostalgia while still being timeless about the music. And what I mean is that I feel like whenever I listen to a pop punk song, I feel like I'm listening to my youth when I was an angsty, snot-nosed kid. You know what I mean, Matt?
Yeah, kind of. See, for me, I always think of pop punk as it's just fun. You know, there are certain bands that I will tell you that, like, let me throw it out there, like Rise Against. I love Rise Against. However, some of what they talk about in their music is really kind of time capsuled because it's political in nature at times. So that stuff doesn't always age the best. But then you have, bands like Green Day and the Ramones and everybody in the Offspring and you just other bands that came out around that time period that are all singing about things that everybody goes through. That's what I think the most common element here is that they sing about things that you go through in adolescence or how you're feeling. Everybody gets pissed off. Everybody, has those days, and everybody feels a certain way at times. And the music connects to those types of people and those types of feelings.
You said it perfectly, actually. It's relatable. That's the beauty and power of the genre, is how relatable its message is.
100%.
How beautiful. Well,
all right. Well, we're done here. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for joining. Well, I guess we should probably determine what the three best albums of pop punk are. What we feel best capture what the genre is. But before we do that, a real big special shout out to Lucky 13 Beard Co. They're based out of New Jersey, produce amazing beard oils and just beard care products. And not only are we proud to have them as a sponsor, but we're also proud to call them a collaborator. Someone thought it was a great idea to let two podcast nerds come up with a scent for a beard oil.
Looking at you, Ed.
Yeah, thanks, Ed, you crazy mofo. But no, Ed's a great guy, and he wanted to work with us on something that smelled cool, but also had a connection to what we do, which is geek out over music. And to us, I mean, what more cool or badass musician is there than Lemmy himself? So yeah, the crazy man known as Ed came up with a scent that just smells so good and really does pay tribute to the god himself, Lemmy.
If you think of Lemmy, what do you think of? Well, besides being a badass, you think of bourbon, cola, tobacco, and leather. That's exactly what it smells like.
Which really equals badassery. Now, I'm not saying that if you use this beard oil, you're going to smell like a badass.
No, you will definitely not smell like backstage either.
No, which you're welcome, by the way. But you're going to smell great, and you're going to feel great too.
It smells so good.
Yeah,
I can't even tell you.
So proud.
I'm really picky about what we put on our podcast advertise because let's put it this way. Nobody wants to hear us talk about advertisements. It's not fun, but we really put some time and effort into this. And we really think that you put this on, you are going to smell amazing. You're going to help support the podcast. You're going to feel good. And that's what matters the most is you feeling good. So if you want to purchase one, head on over to Lucky13, the number, beardco.com. And then in addition to that, we're giving you a code EFP10. Use it at checkout, 10% off your entire order. Lucky13,
it's insane.
The number, beardco.com.
Insane.
What else
is insane?
Got no brain.
You know what else is insane? This segue into, this segue into us talking about pop punk albums.
Okay.
Matt, I'm going to be a gentleman. I'm going to let you go first.
Oh, you're going to let me go first. Okay.
I'm going to let you go first. You go ahead. Tell us which 3 albums you think are the best encapture what pop punk is. Educate me, fool.
Well, see, I think a lot of people are going to maybe not be so happy with my list because
that's a great way to freaking start.
Well,
by the way.
there is a reason why.
Because I'm coming out going like, "Oh, you're not going to like this," and then just
there's a reason why, because I'm not going with what I think are your prototypical best albums. There might be one on here, but I think I've got pretty good reasons. So hang on. Okay. The first album I'm going to start out with really was one of the first pop punk albums that I actually bought on my own. And I remember wearing this CD down because it was just constantly getting knocked around. And when I got my license and I had a car, it was always in there. And it also kind of hit me that I loved this album even before I knew the album, because the Offspring's Americana was actually the soundtrack to Crazy Taxi on the Dreamcast. So songs like Have You Ever and Walla Walla and Feelings all were part of the soundtrack to the game. And I had no clue that it was the Offspring until later on. But I got the album, and to me, this is when the Offspring became pop punk. They were straight up punk when they did Smash, and that was the best-selling indie album of the time when it came out. But I think that the Offspring started to get more of their signature pop punk sound with this album, with songs like Pretty Fly for a White Guy and why am I blanking on the other one? Why Don't You Get a Job? There's just so many really good songs on here, and to me, really speaks to what pop punk is. It's popular, it's angsty, it's at times maybe a little bit dark. You know, the kids aren't all right. That's, if you think about it, that's a pretty heavy message of a song. So for the Offspring, I think this is when pop punk for them became really a thing. So for all the reasons, and it's just a badass album from front to back, and hearing the songs live, I mean, they still sound amazing. They still sound great. So I'm going to go with the Offspring's Americana as my first pick.
Okay.
Second pick is going to go way further back. So we are going to go with the Ramones' Third Offering in Rockets to Russia.
Out of all the albums, okay. Sorry, continue.
The reason why is, let's face it, a lot of punk music wouldn't exist if it weren't for the Ramones. I know a lot of people also point their pop punk fingers at the Stiff Little Fingers. And I'm taking this album because this was 2 years before the Stiff Little Fingers released their album. I think it was called Inflammable Material, but it's whatever the one is with, it's like a dark blue cover with the red flames all over it. I forget the name. I'm blanking on it right now. It's late, sue me. But this album really was the Ramones meets like the 1950s or the 1960s, or like a surf style of rock, with the Ramones punk flair to it. And they really wanted to try to hit a single for every single song that they have on here. If that doesn't say pop punk, I don't know what does. But they had their own take on the 50s with songs like Sheena's a Punk Rocker, Rockaway Beach, Here Today, Gone Tomorrow. It sounds like it could have been like one of those 50s sappy jukebox breakup songs. And then they do covers on the album of Do You Want to Dance from Bobby Freeman and The Surfing Bird from the Trashmen, or Peter Griffin, depending on, your frame of reference. But I mean, this album really was the Ramones trying to break in harder than they have in the past to become popular. So the Ramones being punk and then trying to be as popular as they can be, that's pop punk. So I don't care how you slice it. The Ramones, one of the best punk bands of all time, becoming popular, and I would say doing it pretty successfully, even though not many of the songs had a lot of structuring to them. I mean, this album it was a great album. Granted, it doesn't have, I don't want to say that signature Ramone sound, because it does. It just tweaks it a little bit to kind of go back 20 years prior to when it came out, and to have that 50 style sound. Because if you think about it now, from what Zach mentioned earlier, where it comes and goes in waves with, pop punk. Well, what was popular in the 50s, in the early 60s, well, that surf rock influence kind of was there. So now with them going back, this is kind of like that wave coming back where it becomes popular again. So now the Ramones are doing that, and here we are. So I'm thinking that Rocket to Russia is one of the greatest pop punk albums of all time. So that's number 2.
Okay.
And number 3, this is just a softball, watermelon, knock it out of the park, however you want to say it. I mean, if I didn't put this on here, what am I doing? Probably the biggest pop punk album of all time, Green Day's Dookie. I mean, do I even need to say anything more about this one? I really don't think I do. If you haven't heard...
But it's a podcast, so you probably should.
Probably. But I mean, if you've never heard Green Day's Dookie before, I mean, come on. Every Green Day song that you know probably comes off of this album, except if you got into Green Day at American Idiot. Then, well, go back a few years and take a listen to Dookie. I mean, come on. I mean, here, I'll go down some of the tracks on this thing if you don't know. Longview, Welcome to Paradise, Basket Case, She, When I Come Around, and then those are the big singles. But the rest of the album really does play into Green Day being more than just a pop punk band. They really do go into more of their punk roots on the rest of the album. But it's just a great album. And this is really what revived pop punk in the early 90s. So it's great. And the album cover is amazing in itself. If you never actually took the time to look deep into the album cover, around like the explosion of the A-bomb that was dropped, I mean, it's a really cool album cover. I think Ozzy's in there somewhere.
Yeah, Ozzy's in there. Black Sabbath. Actually, not Ozzy. It's the mysterious woman that appears on the first album cover, the self-titled debut of Black Sabbath. And there's like the lyrics to the song Black Sabbath in there. It just so happens to look like Ozzy.
Well, that's probably why I thought it was Ozzy, because it looks like Ozzy.
No, fair mistake.
I mean, there's not much else I can say about this album. If you've never listened to it, go listen to it. So there you go. Those are my 3. The Offspring's Americana, the Ramones' Rocket to Russia, and Green Day's Dookie. So now, did I surprise you a little bit?
Yeah, you did, actually. I will get into the artists who I thought you were going to pick after I give my accurate list.
your accurate list.
Let me get right into it. Your pick of Dookie, yeah, it's hard to argue that one. And spoiler, it's probably going to end up in the top 3 for sure. However, if there is a single album that I would argue maybe gives Dookie a run for its money in regards to being the ultimate genre-defining album of pop punk, I would say it is this little album, Enema of the State by Blink-182. Dare I say, this is the blueprint for goofball pop punk that it came out in 1999, but it laid the groundwork for what every pop punk band was trying to sound like for years to come after that. And it captured the humor that you associate with pop punk, for better or worse. But it also captures the simplicity, the just great song structure. I mean, all the small things. It's still a catchy ass song. It's still just an earworm that sticks into your head. And, What's My Age Again? Of course, it's still like it. And that song also just captures, the almost the midlife crisis that so many teens act like they're going through. And it's like, as an adult, you're like, snap out of it. But at that point, it's like, oh my God, I'm about to turn 23. It just captures the youthful innocence that you have so perfectly. And then for an album that has so many silly songs like Aliens Exist, you then get a song like Adam's Song. I mean, it's such a touching song. And I also think, that album is a huge reason why Travis Barker is essentially the godfather of rock right now, in that so many artists, all different genres, are going to Travis to collaborate with him on songs or for him to produce it. And I'm not just talking about artists like Machine Gun Kelly is the reason why. It's a classic among so many different people.
I think they just want to know how to get with a Kardashian.
As much as I'd like to go along with that joke, Travis Barker's influence goes even way back before that. I mean, it's crazy to think how many collaborations he's done in the past almost 2 decades. It's weird. I mean, he really has bridged the gap between 2 different genres. But yeah, I think Blink-182's Enema of the State, no brainer. My second pick. So admittedly, this one might be a tad controversial because you could argue that this isn't really a pop punk band, that they were kind of after the scene, that they were more on the emo spectrum, that they were more just straight up punk or just straight up rock, that, they hated the title so much. They distanced themselves from it for so much. But I would argue that one particular album from theirs, at least, really did help revigorate the genre, take it into a different direction. Because they're always constantly referred to as emo. I would argue that this album is what kind of took the slight playfulness that bands like Blink-182 were doing, but then added a little bit more of an edge, a little bit more grittiness to it, and a little bit more technicality, a little bit more danger, and again, key word here, emotion. I'm talking, of course, about My Chemical Romance, and I dare you to say that a song like I'm Not Okay is not pop punk. I'm sorry, but that's just a great example of pop punk. And then you just have amazing songs like Give 'Em Hell, Kid, and Thank You for the Venom that are just so awesome and just so in your face, so just full of energy and an emotion. It's, again, the playfulness meets straight up edge and grit. And that it might not necessarily be the most pure pop, but Three Cheers for Sweet Revenge, to me, that's a hell of a pop punk album. You slowly started to see bands more so copy that. You can argue that Fall Out Boy came out a little bit before that with different their own album, but My Chemical Romance definitely laid the groundwork for what pop punk ended up becoming after 2004. Don't get me wrong, I love Green Day's American Idiot. It's one of my favorite albums of all time, but you can definitely tell that at least even visually, Green Day were taking some cues from that album and from My Chemical Romance at that point in their career, even though there was only a short few months gap in between those albums. So, my second pick, Three Cheers for Sweet Revenge by My Chemical Romance. Come at me, bro, with some hate. The third one, this one, I'm not going to lie, is a little tough. And I'm going to be honest and say it's down to either 2 or 3 albums for me. It's kind of just like, if you ask me tomorrow, I might change my mind. The 2 albums right now that I'm torn between are Jimmy Eat World's Bleed American and Paramore's Riot. I know what you're thinking, Jimmy Eat World, maybe they're not necessarily pop punk, but I would argue that while they definitely lean more towards the rock spectrum, they definitely had pop punk elements to them. And they're probably the most mature sounding pop punk band during a time when Blink-182 and even Sum 41 were kind of being goofballs. They were talking about real emotions and real world scenarios that anyone, not even just young people, were going through when it came to love, came to relationships, came to just their own personal mind frames. And Bleed America, just a great album. But then on the other end, you got Paramore's Riot, and you kind of can make the argument that there's different albums from them to choose, but I'm sorry, but a song like Misery Business, so good. That's a guilty pleasure band for me, to be honest with you. Paramore. Hayley Williams got a great sense of wit to her songwriting and lyrics, and there's a lot of artists now that praise her for what she's done and how, especially during a time when a big criticism that pop punk got during the 2000s was just for kind of being sexist and not very inclusive. And Hayley Williams kind of broke down the door and really helped make it a little bit more inclusive. I know I keep going back and forth, and that was probably a cheap way for me to throw in another album there, but I'm going to go with Bleed America because it just kind of was the opposite end of the upbeat youthfulness. There was just a sense of maturity that came with Bleed America, and just the right amount of balancing of pop hooks with anthemic guitar riffs. The middle is just still a freaking fun song, and the title track is just plain out awesome. Yeah, I'm going to go Bleed America. So to recap, my final 3, Blink-182's Enema of the State, My Chemical Romance's 3 Cheers for Sweet Revenge, and Jimmy Eat World's Bleed American. Matt, I have to call something out with you.
Go on.
There are 3 bands who I am very surprised you didn't include in your list.
Okay.
The first is New Found Glory. I really thought you were going to give New Found Glory a shout out here.
I considered it.
New Found Glory.
I do.
I can see you making the argument for them. But what happened?
So with New Found Glory, I just don't think that they pushed the needle as far as other bands. Like, obviously, Green Day, you can't argue with that. The Offspring with Americana, it really was bled over into so many different types of media at that point that it really became a part of culture for a little while, especially if you were like if you were big into video games at the time, and Crazy Taxi came out. That was like one of the things that people talked about all the time was the soundtrack to that game. And that, along with the catchiness of the rest of the album, really kind of, for me, solidified what pop punk was. And that wasn't that far off when New Found Glory dropped Sticks and Stones. They released that in 2002, and The Offspring released Americana in 98. So 4 years apart. I know My Friends Over You was a huge, huge song for them off of that album, but Head On Collision wasn't really as big. And then, they kind of just falls off after that, if you're not a true New Found Glory fan. So
okay.
I don't think that it was as big of a needle mover as The Offspring was. And then the Ramones. Obviously, it's the Ramones.
So then now another one I'm surprised you didn't pick. This album I was actually, well, maybe not this album particularly, I was surprised you picked, but I kind of thought you might give Fall Out Boy some credit. I was very close to picking From Under the Cork Tree because, definitely I think a lot of fans point to Take This to Your Grave as the top tier pop punk album. I think there's no denying how From Under the Cork Tree, that album really helped bring back, kind of similar to 3 Cheers for Sweet Revenge, brought back pop punk into some mainstream, and it amplified their popularity too. When we saw the Hella Mega Tour and Fall Out Boy weren't able to perform because of COVID, what was the song that Rivers did? Sugar We're Going Down in their tribute.
Mm-hmm.
That song's massive still. So I kind of thought that maybe I could have seen you kind of giving that album or even at least Fall Out Boy a shout out. Because I would argue they definitely have a huge influence in pop punk.
And see, to me, I don't consider them pop punk.
You don't? I do.
No, I just think that they're I think more pop rock than pop punk. And yet this is probably splitting hairs. But here's the reason why. If you listen to the rest of what I consider to be pop punk, you have like we've been talking about the Offspring, Green Day, and the Ramones. Very clearly punk. Then how popular or how poppy can they get? From Under the Cork Tree is just a feel-good rock, almost on the border of emo album. And I know for you, well, hang on, for you with Paramore, I would go along the same lines. I really wouldn't consider Paramore to be punk. I would consider it on that.
The key, though, is pop punk. And I would argue that Paramore and Fall Out Boy are two bands that started off in the beginning as more on the punk side of pop. But then as years went on, they became pop. Not even rock, like pop.
I would still argue that From Under the Cork Tree is a good rock album, and I think this is where you start to
split hairs.
Well, not even split hairs, but this is where you get into a problem when you start trying to classify music, because a song like Dance Dance maybe has a little bit of punk elements to it, but then Sugar We're Going Down, I don't think has any punk element to it. That's just a great that's a great straight ahead rock song.
It's a great song, but I think there's punk elements throughout the whole album.
I felt no punk elements in that when I played it in my cover band.
Hold on, I want to know for the record, before Fall Out Boy fans come after us, Matt was in a cover band that played Sugar We're Going Down. So before you come at us for not being fans, that's called dedication, brother. Why did I do Hulk Hogan with the New York accent?
I have no idea.
So I just saying my piece there, and then I was kind of expecting you to pick Sum 41, maybe All Killer No Filler.
I mean,
I would argue. I mean, I like that album a lot. To me, like I love Sum 41 too. We've interviewed Cone. I mean, great, and that album was great too. But I kind of expect you to pick that, but I also am a little relieved you didn't, because as much as I love that album, to me, it kind of, you can make the argument. A lot of the things you could talk about that album were what Blink-182 did with Enema of the State, and also with take your
pants off and jacket.
That's right. Take your pants off and jacket. And just the humor aspects and the goofball, but I always appreciate it because they wore their metal influences on their sleeves, so they had a little bit more technicality to them. So I can see that kind of being like up in the air in regards to their influence.
I see. Once again, I don't think that album pushed the needle. I think it made another band. Like, it absolutely made Sum 41, but as far as pushing the needle for pop punk in any way, shape, or form, I don't think it did. Outside of Fat Lip and In Too Deep, I mean, the rest of the album's okay. I mean, Pain for Pleasure would have been great if it wasn't 1:43, but I don't know. I don't think that album really is like one of the best of all time.
So now, Matt, I'm curious about something. Before we go into duking it out over the final three, there's a game that you and I always love to play called The Big Four.
Oh, that game. Genres. Not the other one.
Not the other one where we attempt to give reviews in under 2 minutes and fail miserably. If you had to name the quote unquote big four bands of pop punk, who would you name?
Well, I think I've already named 3 of the 4. So definitely Green Day, definitely the Offspring, the Ramones. Yeah, I'm throwing the Ramones in there. I think a lot of people, when the Ramones first came out, I think that because it was such a new genre of music, or it was such a new style, I don't want to say genre, a new style of music, that it was seen as its most purest form. But when you go and listen to it now and compare it to other things that are now punk, I think later bands did it, I don't want to say better, but they did it in a way where it was more anarchist, not more anarchist. I don't. I think that. Go ahead.
So it's interesting because the one band that I thought you were definitely going to mention among your three, which is what I would have mentioned, you haven't mentioned yet.
Right. I like to keep you on your toes.
Fair enough.
Who would I call the fourth? Who would I call the fourth?
Are you just egging me on now, or
no? I'm thinking. Who would
seriously?
I consider? Yeah, seriously.
Cough. Blink-182. Cough. Blink-182. I'm sorry. What? You seriously taking this long to name Blink-182 as among the to me? To me it's a no-brainer that it's definitely Green Day and it's definitely Blink-182. And the other two spots you can kind of argue. I could see the Offspring being argued as one of those bands, but I would even argue that as much as I love the Ramones and their influence on not just pop punk but just punk and rock is undeniable. I would almost view them as more of the godfathers of pop punk,
and that's why they're there.
No, but like the guy, as in they influenced the big four, like kind of like how with metal, you wouldn't say that Motorhead is the big four of thrash metal because they were the influencers of the big four.
And see, you don't want to go down that road with me because I could make the argument to replace Anthrax in there with Motorhead.
Oh no, you're good thing
you
don't want to go down that road because I will fight for Anthrax. I will fight for Anthrax. I will fight for Anthrax, damn it. You're seriously not going to concede the Blink-182 being that big four band? I'm shocked.
Yeah, all right. Blink-182. So there you go.
I feel like you're just trying to pull my leg here. So you're saying your big four would be Green Day,
the Offspring, Green Day, the Offspring,
Ramones, and Blink-182. I would say Green Day for sure, Blink-182 for sure, probably the Offspring, although I can be talked out of that. And I still don't know about. I feel like the Ramones are bigger than the big four discussion.
If you're talking the big four, you have to put the biggest in there.
No, but but I'm thinking also about the time frame too, in that they were they influenced the rest of those big four.
Doesn't matter.
I don't know if I would call them the big four. I mean, it's just also considering the time frame of like the 90s. I could see someone arguing for Rancid, even though they're kind of more to me ska than they are pop punk.
They're the opening act.
That fourth slot's basically if they're to tour, that would be the opening.
No, they're the opening act. They're the ones that come on before the big four.
I don't know about that, but yeah, I mean, I could almost see. You're gonna probably kill me for saying this, but I could even see the argument being made for Fall Out Boy. I know that you don't really think of them as that much punk, but
nope.
I would disagree in that there's definitely pop punk elements, or they are one of the bigger pop punk acts. Not just rock. I think even more so punk than rock. Granted, they definitely went in the more pop direction, but those first 2-3 albums, it's kind of hard to deny the pop punk elements there, with Ramones being the godfather, the concierge to them. But anyway, so now comes the real fun of this. To recap, Matt, your 3 albums were The Offspring's Americana, Ramones' Rocket to Russia,
yep,
and Green Day's Dookie.
Yes.
Mine were Blink-182's Enema of the State, My Chemical Romance's 3 Cheers for Sweet Revenge, and Jimmy Eat World's Bleed America. So I think let's go ahead and just declare it in that Green Day's Dookie and Blink-182's Enema of the State definitely in the final 3. And it's more of a debate about the third slot.
Yep.
Out of curiosity, I'm not saying that this is definitely going to be the third album. Which of the 2 albums that I mentioned would you have picked?
Honestly, I think it's going to have to be My Chemical Romance. I think that My Chemical Romance, the further back you go with them, and I think right when they hit 3 Cheers for Sweet Revenge, they had that blend of punk and emo. I don't think they were full blown like Black Parade levels of like emo. I think this was I think that was the perfect blend for them at the time. And actually probably one of the most perfect blends of punk and emo that was out. I think that's a great example album.
So if I had to choose between your two other picks,
what would you choose?
as much as there's no denying the influence of the Ramones, if I was to think of pop punk, I would think of the Offspring sooner. To me, maybe it's also because part of me thinks of the Ramones as more of just straightforward punk. Definitely there's some pop elements there. I mean, they really had a great sense for songwriting, and really you can make the argument that it's just pop rock songs that are a little bit higher, less technical pace, but I always thought of them as more of just punk. Whereas the Offspring, you can definitely make the argument that they've always been more punk too, but definitely, especially with an album like Americana, I mean, pretty fly for a white guy. There's no denying the pop element there.
Right.
So I probably would choose out of your two, the Offspring's Americana. Now, out of curiosity, now that you've heard my suggestion for Three Cheers for Sweet Revenge, does that persuade you towards My Chemical Romance more, or are you still kind of gung-ho on Americana?
I honestly think I'm still more gung-ho with Americana. Once again, think about what moved the needle more. And I think that the Offspring, honestly, go ahead.
No, you said what moved the needle more. I would totally disagree with. If you're going to make what made a bigger impact in music or even for the band, I mean, I would argue that Americana was kind of the band's last big hurrah in mainstream. I like a lot of the songs that they've done after that, but they never really reached the same success as they did with Americana. Okay. And with My Chemical Romance, that album was what skyrocketed them to huge stardom, and what kind of skyrocketed a lot of bands to follow into that genre, into pop punk, into just punk music again. Even I'm Not Okay, that was a huge song. Helena was a huge song. And then that led into the Black Parade, which became a huge, massive success too. I would actually argue that Three Cheers made a much bigger dent than The Offspring. And I would dare argue that a big point for me or what's helping my argument is that when they reunited, and granted the tour has been postponed a lot because of COVID, but they're playing arenas and they're selling out arenas. To me, the Offspring has gone downhill a lot. And I say that with a lot of love. But
they're at different stages of their career. We're not talking about careers. We're talking about albums.
And but you're talking about what moved the needle.
Right. Well, hang on. When I say move the needle, I'm talking about that album specifically. So if you're telling me that is peak Offspring and that's it, like that is the Offspring at their best, would you say that My Chemical Romance was at their best on Three Cheers for Sweet Revenge? Some people would say probably not, and that would be the Black Parade. Well, I'm saying that the album itself, just the sheer numbers that this album sold is insane for the Offspring, to be clear.
But you can make the argument that it wasn't because the songs were that great. It's because they already had a ton of hits at that point. That Smash was already a massive album that even just Gone Away, that was a huge song before that album came out. I mean, that album, Three Cheers for Sweet Revenge, introduced My Chemical Romance to a lot of fans, but then just spurred a lot of big hits too. I mean, I think that, to me, the whole move the needle part is not, I'm not saying that this is making me more, saying no to the Offspring, but that argument is not convincing me to abandon my pick. With that said, I was about to then give it to the Offspring because we were talking about the big four of pop punk, giving it to the Offspring, but this is not about which band was the best of pop punk. This is about the album. Make one more argument at me about Americana.
I mean, the only other one that I can go on right now is how many video games have My Chemical Romance been a part of where they were the primary band on the soundtrack? None.
Well, that's not fair. That's a bad argument too. No, that's another bad argument.
No, how many? Not. That album was
you want to go
the
down
soundtrack.
This route? You want to go down this route? How many music videos got played nonstop on MTV off of Americana?
Pretty fly for a white guy. The kids aren't all right.
And
that's all they needed.
Guess what? My Chemical Romance had at least 3 singles, huge singles off of that album that got heavy rotation
Then was
on
TRL
MTV.
was TRL still relevant in 2004? I
No,
don't think so.
but they didn't need TRL to get that popular. That's how popular My Chemical Romance was. They performed Helena on the MTV VMAs.
And I'm sure the Offspring performed at some point too that I just can't
I
remember.
don't know. Was it Pretty Fly? I mean, I'm just saying, like, if you're gonna go down the route of, oh, they got on so many video games, My Chemical Romance got on so many television sets. Like, you're only kind of making me feel more confident in My Chemical Romance pick. I hate to say this. We've done this once or twice before, but I feel like we might be at a tie here. I don't know if you're going to be able to persuade me off of 3 Cheers. What do you look? What are you pondering? You have a ponder face on you. For those who can't see what Matt's reaction is right now, because podcast.
Okay, here, wait. Here. So, out of the songs on the album, Pretty Fly for a White Guy, Why Don't You Get a Job, The Kids Aren't All Right, and She's Got Issues, earned the Offspring to date the heaviest airplay that had ever been seen on MTV. It is also the 224th best-selling album of all time, according to Billboard.
3 Cheers for Sweet Revenge has sold over 3 million copies to date in the U.S. alone.
Oh, that's
certified 3 times platinum.
5 times platinum in the U.S. Over 5 million sold.
All right. I will. No. Hold on.
Go ahead.
Here's what I'll give the Offspring the edge here, only because I could also see people making the argument about My Chemical Romance being more emo than they are pop punk. Even though I don't like this one bit. And I would even urge everyone listening, if you disagree and think My Chemical Romance's 3 Cheers for Sweet Revenge should have been in the top 3, comment on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at Epic Footnote. Don't worry, I'll repeat the tag later. So I will concede to Offspring's Americana.
Boom.
You douche. So then and you know what? I will say, because I think there might be some people who would argue that we chose the wrong Offspring album. I would concede in that The Kids Aren't All Right is such a great song. And it's such a great pop punk song too.
I think that, once again, going back to my argument from earlier, I really think that this is the pop punk album from The Offspring. I'm not arguing that Smash isn't a great album. It is. It was the best-selling indie album of all time for a while just because it was that great of an album.
Also one of the best albums of 1994, according to Epic Footnote Productions. If you have to pick best of albums in 1994, go ahead and listen to it on any stream platform you have.
But I think that this is pop punk for like the best of pop punk, and the other one is just a straightaway punk album, just like the rest of the Offspring's early releases. This was the Offspring evolving.
So to recap, the top 3 pop punk albums of all time, according to us, are Green Day's Dookie, no denying how great and influential that album was. Blink-182's Enema of the State, also no denying the influence of it. And the Offspring's Americana. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Are we missing albums? Do you think some of the bands that we mentioned are actually pop punk or not at all? That we are totally off and we have no idea what the hell we're talking about? Well, guess what? There are some social media platforms where you can tell us what you think. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, maybe MySpace. Since it's pop punk, we might as well boost it back up for old time's sake. At Epic Footnote, let us know what you think. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel to hear more podcasts like this, as well as check out some pretty cool videos. And once again, thank you so much to Lucky 13 Beard Co. Go to lucky13beardco.com. Not only can you buy our very own Lemmy-inspired beard oil, but also use the code EFP10 to get 10% off of your purchase. And also a special thank you to Rootless Coffee Co. They're based out of Flint, Michigan. Great, delicious, and interesting coffee flavors that they produce. And they work with a lot of cool podcasts, artists, comic book creators, wrestlers, other brands on creating their own blends, including us. Yeah, we don't just make beard oil. We also make coffee with them. go to rootlesscoffee.com, purchase a bag of your very own Epic Footnote roast, and if you use the code EPICROAST, you'll get 15% off your order on some of their own original blends. Really delicious stuff. The kind of coffee that breaks free from boring. It really does. So thank you so much for listening, and we hope you join us for another episode real soon.
Feelings. Whoa. Feelings. Get out of my life.
I'm not okay.